Welcome back to my channel. Thank you guys for joining us. Tonight I'm going to be talking about a QA session, a strategic problem solving session that I think a lot of people could really benefit from, because there still are so many misconceptions out there in nutrition, and most of them do kind of center around the scale or body weight measurements and different things of that nature. So I wanted to talk today specifically about things that cause scale weight fluctuation, but not only that, things that can kind of make you feel discouraged during the process of either changing or transforming your body, doing a recomposition, a fat loss phase, or a muscle building phase, or sometimes one phase right into the next. So the first one that I want to talk about is the differences that we see in calorie trackers. MyFitnessPal, Macros First, and a lot of the different macronutrient trackers are very off on calories, so you have to be extremely careful about looking at the data on the backs of your packages. This is how you can become an even more accurate tracker. And in terms, if your macros are the same every day or very close, so are your calories. And that's why a lot of people choose to track macros versus calories, because some of the information does have quite a bit of variable in it, and the USDA, FDA has not gotten to a very firm set of standards on reporting. Even though they are doing better in some areas, it's still not foolproof. So if your macros are the same, your calories are going to be the same. So it might be helpful for you just to write down your macro averages every week if you don't have an Excel spreadsheet. If you have an Excel, it does help to see that you've got some variable on a daily basis or throughout the week, and that your averages might be a little bit more off than you think. It is important to go back and review that data at your leisure, just like it would be important to look at your workouts. So with workouts, a lot of people think that your calories burned on your Apple Watch or on some of the heart rate trackers and things like that is correct. They vary extremely from one to the next. So the Garmin is a pretty good step tracker, but again, the calories burned are pretty much off on almost all of them by a third, sometimes 2/3. So let's say, for instance, you worked out and your Fitbit says that you burned 600 calories during a session of training. Let's be honest and let's just be real. In a 45-minute session, it's probably not super feasible that you actually burn 600 calories. It doesn't also take into consideration your human physiology. Again, it's just a general population calculator. So don't get excited and think you should feed yourself 600 more calories because you earned it. That would also just be something that you want to try to get an average read on. So maybe look at that 600 calories burn. If you think that your intensity was really high for that workout, maybe go with 400 or put that in your brain or your log. At the end of the week, you're going to look at your expenditure. If you're getting more than 5 or 6 hours of expenditure, your average weight multiplier would probably be a weight times 13.5 to 14. If you're somebody who trains 6 or 7 days a week, it might be a multiplier of 14 or 15 to find your active metabolic rate, or the amount of calories burned while you're exercising. And again, that is such a dartboard, so you might be shooting around just a little bit trying to find your exact maintenance for expenditure versus no expenditure, okay? So those are some mistakes that people make, and I think misconceptions that people have is like, I burned 600 calories, now I can go and reward myself with 600 calories. Well, again, typically Americans tend to over-report or under-report, and those can be areas where we over and under-report is with food, our intake, and then of course our output, which would be exercise. So moving along, I had a really great question come in from one of my friends, and I heard this question over and over from this same person. It's like, how could I be adding lean body mass when I'm actually in a calorie deficit? And so I was like, well, explain to me how you know you're adding lean body mass. Did you have a DEXA scan done? Do you know that you are, gaining lean body mass? Because if you're in a deficit, chances are you're not building muscle mass. You would have to either be at maintenance or above your calorie intake to start building lean body mass. So do you know that what you're looking at is exactly that? And she was like, no. That's a good point, Kelly. So I said, well, go have a DEXA scan done. And I hear you complaining about you putting on muscle easily. But what I think it is that you're complaining about having put on a little bit of body fat over the last year or so, and you're actually holding a little bit more water in the areas that you hold more fat. And so when you train and you actually tear muscle fiber and it begins to repair, there's a swelling process that happens. So you're sure your pants might feel tight for a couple days after you have trained your arms or your legs. And maybe that is more so what you're referencing, is that you're noticing that now that you're lifting heavier, you're actually holding a little bit more water. And so your clothing feels tighter. Therefore, you feel like you have gained muscle. When really you are probably training the areas that need to be trained. But if you're in a calorie deficit, you probably have to tighten up your diet just a little bit more in order to lose that body fat, because the calorie balance is slightly off from day to day. And that's what I would have you look at first is, are you in a true deficit? Are you in a true surplus? If you're looking to lose body fat, you've got to be in the appropriate calorie deficit. And I know a lot of you have heard me talk about people going slower to gain the benefit of being able to sustain it without having to white knuckle it to the finish line. I think slow fat loss at a half a pound to a pound is a lot easier for most people to considerably sustain, rather than, the crash dieting for 2 or 3 weeks only to gain it back and be discouraged and start that yo-yo dieting cycle again. And that again can be, quite frustrating. So going back to my friend said, okay, I'm going to go and get a DEXA scan, and then I'm going to compare it around Christmas time to what I have now, and I'm going to start tracking my food accurately for 3 months for you. So that's perfect. Do it for you, don't do it for me. But for me as a coach, it is definitely going to be easier for me to say, hey, you are not building lean body mass. You're actually gaining a little bit of fat, because your deficit isn't strict enough all the time. And you can see how you do really well Monday through Thursday, but by Friday you kind of fall off, and Friday's over. Saturday you feel guilty, so you rein it back in, and by Sunday you're back off again. And that whole weekend is kind of that weekend warrior syndrome, if you will. So those are some of the things that I see people really, really struggle with in fat loss phases. I also see that when they're under a tremendous amount of high stress situations, or they're going through the holidays, they've got family in town, they're traveling, they don't pay as close of attention to their micronutrient intake as well. Getting really high quality micronutrient dense foods into their tracker. And a lot of people rely on simple, fast, and easy things, or fast food during this time frame. I've already seen an uptick, unfortunately, in my coaching group for people who are kind of burnt out on food prepping and fat loss phases, and they're like kind of jogging to the holiday time by adding more processed and packaged foods into their tracker than I've seen probably the first half of the year, January through July or January through June. July is when most of the kids are still out of school. And we do see that some of that junk food kind of creeps back in. And come August, they do a little bit better, August and September. And then October hits and people are like, YOLO, let's do this. And we know that Halloween kind of starts off the candy binge and bender, and stress levels go up because usually people are in a tighter financial position in the holiday time, and they're trying to afford Christmas gifts and get all these gifts and wrap them. And it's a bunch of stress traveling. And I think for a lot of people, they've gone to not gift giving, but giving memories or doing things together. And that's kind of relieved a lot of that. However, you still do have the stress of travel and maintaining those relationships with your friends and your family members. And so if you're one of those people that struggles with minimizing your stress during the holidays, I want to encourage you just to kind of deep breathe and make sure that you aren't over-promising. That way you won't feel like you're under-delivering. I think always the best thing for my coaching group that I recommend doing is pulling things off your plate and not replacing them with other things during the holidays, but just allowing yourself to have a little bit more downtime than you normally would. And then you can grind it out in January again. December is 1 month. Depending on what you want your goals to be for the holiday season, you can either just make sure that you're minimizing stress, watching your alcohol, paying close attention to tracking your macros, tracking your food by estimation, watching that you don't get sick over the holiday season, and you're watching your sugar intake, and you're not getting too much in the way of overtraining because you feel so bad about the junk food that you're eating, rather having a balance there. And not just swinging that pendulum all the way to the right because you're like, hey, it's the holiday time, I'll jump back on after January. Keep some of those wonderful practices in your system, like managing your fiber at 2 or 3 or 3 to 4 grams per meal. It's a good place to start. Adding some strength training during this time frame when you know you're going to be eating a little bit more in the way of calories, or just getting into a smaller deficit. If you've been in a 300-400 calorie deficit or a 500 calorie deficit per week, maybe you make it a smaller deficit and you go to 150 to 200 calorie deficit and you lower your protein, increasing the fun stuff, the carbs and fat for a while. That might be a good idea, because that, along with strength training and some walking, and you're probably going to maintain, if not see some progress through the end of November, and maintenance while you're in December, if you are pretty mindful about your calorie balance. So when I reference calorie balance, this is something that people often ask me, and this was one of the questions that came in, was when I reference calorie balance, do I mean eating the same amount of calories every day? Well, yes, that's what I mean, but also knowing where those calories come from. Because, excuse me, for some of you, if 500 of your calories are coming from protein, 300 of your calories are coming from carbs, and 900 of your calories are coming from dietary fat, depending on the deficit, you might actually be a little bit slower to lose because you need to modify a little bit more in the other areas. Some people need to have a 35-30-35 split. Some people have a much more pertinent goal, and it's going to be something that they want to hit more quickly. So that being said, sometimes you've got to lower the dietary fat down and only eat a certain amount of calories for your body weight from the dietary fat category, make your carbs a little higher because you actually train quite frequently, and then have enough protein, obviously, to keep you satiated and keep you from losing lean body mass while you diet. There's an intricate system there, and that is your calorie balance. So we might have a different calorie balance for mass gaining, and we might have a different calorie balance for fat loss, obviously. Okay, those are two different equations completely. There's obviously a lot more flexibility when you're in maintenance or even a surplus rather than in a calorie deficit, where you kind of have to figure out what you can commit to as far as weeks. And you say, okay, for the next 2 weeks, I've got to go really hard, really strict, prep all my meals at home, maybe only eat 20 to 30% of my food from non-nutrient dense, not really going out and having things that I would have if I'm more flexibly eating at maintenance. I think a lot of people have a hard time maneuvering in the gray area. So they think they're either going to prep all their food and be super strict and watch their sugar and watch their fiber, or they're not going to do anything at all. And the happiness and the balance is there somewhere in the middle. You should still be mindful of your sugar intake, even when you're at maintenance, and especially at maintenance. Because again, we're all aging and we don't need to be eating a ton of processed and packaged foods along with refined sugars. It's probably not going to be the very best equation for optimal health, right? Same thing with water intake. All the things that can cause your scale weight to fluctuate, and especially in a fat loss phase when you're really trying to get those wonderful static readings, is stress, cortisol, alcohol, sodium, drinking different amounts of water, strength training, carbohydrate intake, because carbohydrates, again, for every gram you eat, you're going to hold 3 grams of water. So if you go over one day, or you have an alcoholic beverage or something, that's going to cause a little bit of scale weight fluctuation for a few days until you get back on track with that calorie balance again. Alcohol is just a slight disruption also to your human physiology, normal human physiology, if you will. And again, taking antibiotics or over-the-counter drugs, that can also cause your scale weight to fluctuate a little bit. So kind of what you need to keep in mind is if you did not overeat by 3,500 additional calories for the week, you probably didn't gain a pound of fat. Now, that scale weight fluctuation is there because a lot of times people don't take into consideration that they did have a high salt meal, even though they maybe drank the same amount of water or roughly throughout the week. That may impact for a day or so. But the body is super smart. It's always going to go back to what it has and what it needs. And again, is going to get you there one way or the other. So if you restrict too hard, you probably will see massive recoil. And I don't want that for you, because the probably the number one problem we have in the US is not losing body fat, but actually keeping that body fat off once you've lost it. I think that about 80% of people that do things slowly and more strategic find better long-term results. And that's what actually we have gone out and given polls to our past clients from the last 10 years. And that is exactly what we found. The people who kind of fizzled out when they got to their diet and said, hey, I've got this and I'm going to go on my own, and didn't really give us a whole lot of notice and just kind of took it on. They either went on to do different things. They don't track macros long term anymore. And it might be because it was not a good fit for them long term. And that is okay. But for the 80% that do make it to their goal and they love tracking, and then tracking's just become a habit for them, they may not even use the food scale anymore, but they are actually maintaining within 1 to 3 pounds of their goal weight. That's really fun to hear. And I would say that, there's probably about 10% of our clients that end up coming back for touch-ups, a little bit of accountability during certain timeframes where they do see that they struggle a little bit with adherence. So I hope that's helpful for you guys. Just a few questions that came in from my QA session, a few things that I heard. I'm going to be working with my friend on, tracking and accuracy so that we can determine whether or not she's actually gaining lean body mass or gaining a little bit of fat, and it's that lifting heavier that's causing that swelling and the tearing of muscle fiber, and then of course holding a little bit of water in the areas where there is more body fat. It's awesome teaching people about that, because again, I think there's a lot of confusion out there rather than clarity. There's just chaos, and it's like, oh, you need to be doing this or you need to be doing that, when really there's quite a few systems that would work. You just have to find the best system that's going to work for you.